1700. Here's a suggestion. You have a question or comment, perhaps you can get a pencil, piece of paper, write it down so that you're well organized, and when you get on the show you take as little time as possible so that we can accommodate as many of you as we can. We ask only, first of all, you respect yourself, and then respect others, and then respect yourself, because we will not accept anything we deem not within our broadcast standards. But we encourage you to be always forceful with your point. Thank you all again for joining us. Your voice in the community, thought that get results. Also, you can follow us on our live video stream on this show on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel at Vaughan Radio. Again, thank you all for joining us. Your voice in the community, thought that get results. Tonight, Edric W. Stanley, good evening.
Good evening, all. Good evening to my fellow panelists. Good evening to the people of St. Kitts, and more particularly the gracious people of Nevis. Those who will be listening to us on the World Wide Web and throughout the Caribbean Basin. Indeed, further afield, the world. Well, based on what I've been hearing from the grapevine, there have been major accusation about Dr. Terence Jew having gotten finance from one of the local banks here for statements which he denied he never made, he never gave authorization to, but at the same time, the social media, they have picked it up and they have ran with the ball, but yet Dr. Jew says he doesn't know anything about it. And it is really sad that it's a silly season, not federally, but at the same time, politics is always local. And whenever somebody wants to paint somebody else of a different color, they sometimes find, or maliciously bring things to the fore regarding things that had not even been said or acted upon. However, I will leave it there. Webbo.
Glendale Herbert, good evening.
Good evening, Webbo. Good evening to my fellow panelists, both Nair and Stanley. It's a pleasure to be here, as per usual. It's a pleasure to be communicating to everybody far afield and everybody who is near amongst us here in Nevis. We're on the ebb of an election on Monday. Some call it silly season, as my colleague Stanley might have alluded to. But at the end of the day, it is a consequential time. It's a consequential election going forward for the next 5 years in Nevis. We're in consequential times, and thus that merits the type of election this is going to be. So, Webbo, I hand over back to you and my colleague Nair.
Conrad Nair Libert, good evening.
Good evening, Webbo, and good evening to my fellow panelists. Good evening to everyone in tune to the program by the various means. Once again, Webbo, we gathered to discuss the issues affecting the people. And of course, we're all aware of the election coming up pretty soon, and the atmosphere is full with back and forth, and the exchange of ideas and words is quite a nice time for me because I enjoy it a lot. Webbo, it's also a very serious time going forward for our little island, and so the people of Nevis must take this opportunity to make a decision as to who they think should captain the ship going forward. Webbo is what we call democracy, but sometimes there are things affecting it that it's not taken into consideration here on island, and so it is not pure from my point of view. And I hope one of these days we may strive to have a more true democracy here in Nevis as it relates to the election especially, and so, but I welcome it based on our political culture. I suppose we are accustomed to what it is, and so we go forward as it is. Webbo, I'm happy to be here once again, and I'm happy to be a part of the conversation tonight. I hope we can shed some light on issues that sometimes perplex the people, and I hope we can arrive at some solution, I suppose. Thank you, Webbo.
Okay. So having made those opening comments, I got a couple of things that I want to put on the table, but as usual, what we got?
Well, the Prime Minister Drew is in Barbados, and as a result, the Cuban thing, he's in Barbados addressing with a delegation for the arrangement between Cuba and our country. But it is sad, I hope that they would take along the plight of Haiti, because things have gotten way out of line in terms of the gang violence in Haiti. And I hope at this forum they will discuss all the regional issues, not only the relationship between Cuba and St. Kitts Nevis, but also the thing that got out of hand regarding the violence in Haiti. Because I would say, if you don't have proper leadership in a country, which our election should give us proper leadership this time around, things can go awry, and ultimately those bad boys, also bad girls, seize the opportunity to take control and to turn the country into chaos. Webbo.
Okay, so that's it. Well,
Well,
go ahead.
Webbo, on the issue of Haiti and Prime Minister making those who are convening in Barbados making coming out with some sort of statement as it relates to Haiti. This has been a 218-year saga as it relates to the Haitian affair. And as it relates to that affair, Caribbean leaders, by and large, has been impotent or inept as it relates to the Haitian question in terms of making comments. Now, I'm not going to be surprised if nothing comes of that again with this convening of leaders. But the as a historical reference, as it relates to Haiti, going somehow 218 years since the independence of that country in 1804, it seems to me that would be something of a far cry at this point.
Well, I'm very happy to see the Caribbean leaders coming together and to try at least discuss the matter as to what's going on in Haiti. I am very happy to see also the good relations that is developing between our federation and the Cuban government. I think it's always a mistake when we tend to exclude a powerful and highly brightened nation as Cuba is, and meaningful to us really. That is very important, I think, and I think the Prime Minister, one who have studied in Cuba, would have just a slight different view about the real situation there, and how much they can contribute to us, and vice versa, being in this hemisphere. That's all I got to say, but I just want to highlight the fact that it's time that Caribbean leaders deal with Caribbean problems across the board. When there's an island in trouble, and just before, they find some Haitians coming into St. Kitts, and they dealt with them like these are the worst terrorists in the world. There are black people who are trying to escape impoverishedness. It just has, so many around the globe, and it hurts when I see our own people who share that historical experience being treated in such a way when they try to escape real bad situation in their country. So I am happy that we are discussing it, and I hope we have a different outlook to the struggle down there, and quite willing to help in accepting people, because there are very skilled people down there that we probably can make use of here. And Webbo, I say no more on that.
Okay, let me just go on to something else, as I indicated. So here on Nevis, we are a few days away, maybe 5-6 days away from
7.
maybe 5-6 days away from polling day, which is the 12th of December. And nomination day was on Monday, which is the 5th of November, 5th of December, nomination day. The facts are that the Concerned Citizens Movement, which is the current party which operated the last 5 years, last election being held on, that's the last local election, December 17th, or rather December 18th, 2017. Now, I just want to say very briefly as well, because I know some who are not really associated closely with St. Kitts and Nevis will wonder, well, what's happening? Didn't you have an election on August 5th? Well, what that means, by way of a brief explanation, St. Kitts and Nevis is a federation with 2 islands, and we have what we call a general election, federation-wise, federal elections, and that was what was held on but on August 5th. In that parliament, there were 11 seats. St. Kitts 8 in terms of constituents, and Nevis 3. There was a change in government whereby the unity construct, which comprised PAM, NRP, not NRP, but Concerned Citizens Movement on Nevis, and the People's Labour Party, PLP, of which Dr. Harris, who was the Prime Minister, was the head. At that poll, the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party, which was the main opposition, got 6 seats, and they went on to form the government. The People's Action Movement on PAM, People's Action Movement PAM on St. Kitts, got 1 seat. Hitherto, before they had 4, and then the People's Labour Party got 1 seat. On Nevis, the Concerned Citizens Movement returned their 3 seats, 100% of the seats, so they got their 3 seats back, and so they won all the seats in Nevis. The parliament, therefore, for the federal government is comprised of the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party with 6 seats. Separate from that, there's a Nevis Island Assembly elections, which the result of that, the winner of that, which we call the local elections, will govern Nevis as far as the Nevis, the administration. So that is the difference, and that is the reason. So the fact that the Concerned Citizens Movement in that election on August 5th won 3 seats, that was at the federal level. So what happens in this local election, therefore, will not have any effect on what happened on August 5th. Whether they win or whether they lose this local election, the Concerned Citizens Movement with their 3 seats will still represent Nevis at the federal level. So that is by way of a short explanation, and for those who did not get it, that's the reason why, and we're having what we call a local election, properly called the Nevis Island Assembly elections, and that will govern the local affairs of Nevis. As I said, currently the Concerned Citizens Movement. In the last election held, were the winners. There are 5 seats, and the Concerned Citizens Movement had 4 of those 5 seats. Now, nomination day, therefore, for the local elections, or the Nevis Island Assembly elections, which will take place on the 12th of December, that's next Monday. Nomination day was held yesterday, Monday. The result of that showed the Concerned Citizens Movement, which is the ruling party, or the incumbents, if you will, nominated candidates as follows. Mark Brantley, who is the leader in constituency number 2, St. John's. Spencer Brand, St. Paul's, that's constituency number 1. Eric Evelyn in constituency number 3, that's St. George, Gingerland. Number 4, St. James, Alexis Jeffers. And number 5, St. Thomas's, Latoya Jones. So, the Concerned Citizens Movement put in forth 4 males, 1 female. The Nevis Reformation Party offered up and had nominated Dr. Janice Daniel Hodge, who is the leader of that party, in constituency number 4, St. James. J.D. Keynes in constituency number 1, St. Paul's, Charlestown. In number 2, St. John's, Dr. Patricia Bartlett. In number 3, St. George, Rohan Isles. And number 5, St. Thomas's, Cleone Stapleton Simmons. And by the way, that is the seat that is held by the NRP and held by Cleone Stapleton Simmons, and that therefore is the seat that of the 5 that the NRP held that I referred to before. And then also nominated on yesterday, on nomination day, the Morals Restoration Movement, MRM, Samuel Keynes, who is the leader in St. John's constituency number 2, and Patricia Jeffers, nominated for the MRM in St. James constituency number 4. So that the MRM offering 2 candidates, 2 constituencies for this election. Those were the slate of the candidates that were nominated for the various parties. Therefore, there are 3 parties contesting the election on December 12th. The Concerned Citizens Movement, which is the incumbent party, defending 4 seats and arguing that they will get 5. The Nevis Reformation Party, contesting all 5 seats and contesting or arguing that they will return with 5. And then the Moral Restoration Movement, who are contesting 2 seats, and maybe this is a light moment, who also argue they will win 5. And that is not funny, because in doing some assessment and trying to find out what the polls are saying, I asked one person, what's going to be the result on Monday night? That person told me the NRP will win 3 seats. And then I asked the other fellow, what will be the result? He says the Concerned Citizens Movement will win 4. And work with me, kids, I always have a problem with math and arithmetic. I said, but that's 7. As far as I know, there are only 5. The other fellow who was there, in his contribution, gave me a good idea. And he says, Webbo, that's a riddle to solve on the playground. So fasten your all seatbelts when the playground opens up a little later. Unless somebody can solve it for me now. If one said, oh, and well, I don't know, maybe the answer is in MRM. Because, okay, so that's the background. That's what's going to be happening on Monday. The polls open at 7. Between now and then, as usual, we will have the supervisor of election here at Vaughan Radio to give us some guidelines as what's happening and stuff like that and so on. And we will, as usual, try to see how best we can assist you, the voter, the general public. One thing I'm encouraging, as we always do, to go ahead and exercise your vote. If you're registered, properly registered, go ahead and exercise your vote. This is perhaps maybe another light moment. I asked one candidate from the last election, I said, how do you explain your performance based on, in contrast to what you told me before the poll? And they said, well, a lot of things were going on, and I didn't have what Edric said people normally should have, a lot of money. So they told me what they advised was to tell the electorate, if a person comes with money, take their money and vote your conscience. And I thought to myself, so I told that candidate, maybe that's what they did. Thus, your results. Okay, now, I have to start off the discussion or the debate. A couple of questions. Question number 1. Might we see a trend from the August 5th poll when CCM captured 3 seats, the 3 seats that were available, St. Paul, and winning in the process the sections, right? And I'll explain a bit, but they captured the St. George section, the St. Paul section, the St. John section, the St. James section, which aligned with the areas that they won in the local election, and thus gave them 4 seats. So in the last poll, they won those areas, and it gave them the numbers to win the 3 seats. Now what happens in the federal is that St. George stands alone and forms a seat. St. Paul's and St. John's are joined together to form 1 seat, and St. James and St. Thomas's are combined to form 1 seat, and that's how we get 3 for the federal. So the question is, and MRM did not make a significant difference. So the question is, might we see that trend continuing into this poll, or will we see something vastly different? Go.
The difference between men, boys and girls, girls and boys, is the price of their toys. And this exercise requires a lot of money. If MRM is beginning to advocate, or they have advocated in the last go around, that they didn't have plenty money, but yet they're now coming up with a strategy to tell people, if they are offered money, take the money and vote your conscience. Doesn't mean that their conscience would be for MRM.
By the way, however, Mr. Stanley, of clarification, if you're implying that I said MRM,
No, you didn't.
Just walk with me. Just let me make my point. If you're implying that I said MRM, I'm just making it clear that I didn't. Go ahead.
Quite so.
Okay.
Well, I'm saying, based on my analysis, based on what you have said, I have deduced that MRM came up with the short end of the votes, and consequently, they didn't fare well. But the answer that the MRM gave you, well, let me back up.
You see, that's why that you know. Anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, again, let me say the price of the difference between men and boys is the price, men, boys, girls and boys, is the price of their toys. And this is no cheap game. It's a game that requires a lot of firepower. And that firepower is usually initiated by money, personality, community involvement, the whole 9 yards. Do the three parties have that amount of control, influence, firepower, as the case might be? I interjected that the party that had not been mentioned but came up with the short end of the stick is MRM, and they don't have the firepower, but they have come up with a strategy to tell the voters what they must do in order to give them an opportunity to be at the top of the other two parties, simply because they want to win. But you can't win if you don't have the firepower, the personality, the community spirit, community involvement, as the case might be. And therefore, you can again put them, bring up the rear. I spoke with a family member.
By the way, you're addressing the question that I put on the table, and that's what you're addressing? Because, no, I don't have a problem with you saying what you want to say. That's why at the beginning I said what we got. But I really want to address this particular thing. So
Well,
I just wanted to know if you're addressing it.
My main address to the question you asked is money or the lack thereof. And therefore I interjected a certain party in the mix, which you did not. And therefore, let me just reiterate again, the difference between men, women and boys, because we have quite a number of women in this go around, is the price of their toys. I leave it there, Webbo.
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question that I asked, but before that, now you see why it's not easy being me? Because I said something, and I made no reference to anything or anybody or any party. Mr. Stanley says that I said that, and I said, correction, I didn't.
I didn't say you said. Okay, Webbo, go ahead.
that's another problem. That's another reason why it's not easy being me. Because everybody thinks they know what I'm going to say. So they don't allow me to say it. Right? So I said, by way of correction, Mr. Stanley, I did not say that. He said, okay. And he goes again a little later and he says, when you said so and so. So I gave up. So what happens in normal life, you see, why it's not easy being me. If a person is in live action saying I said these things when I'm there, you see what happens? You can imagine what happens when I'm not there? It's not easy being me.
And it does happen, sir.
That's why I say it's not easy being me. That's what the evidence shows. Anyway, so here's the question. Might we see a trend from the results of the last poll on August 5th happening in this poll, which will take place on the 12th? On August 5th, the results were that the Concerned Citizens Movement won the 3 seats, which, in breaking it down and on the way to winning the 3 federal seats, won the areas of St. Paul's, St. John's, St. James, and St. George. And the Nevis Reformation Party won St. Thomas's. And the MRM didn't make a significant difference. Or this being a local or an NIA Nevis Island Assembly election, might we see something vastly different, notwithstanding in a sense we have the same candidates? That's the question. So, Glendale.
My opinion on that question, I think this election is going to be, the turnout is going to be different from the last election. We had around a 48% turnout here on the island of Nevis in August 5th. I think the turnout this time is going to be much higher. Generally, it's at least 10 points higher than the federal, historically speaking. I think it would be at least 15 points higher. That's my prediction. I think because in terms of, so that would affect the line in which and how the votes are lined up in terms of percent winning percentages. It will affect outcomes, I think. One of the things that you really can nail down is the overseas vote in terms of the numbers. But what I've gleaned from me looking at what's been happening for the last 7 to 8 days of campaigning here on Nevis, I focus a lot on the metadata. And when I use the word metadata, I mean what's on the platforms such as Facebook and YouTube, and what happens there during the meetings, the political meetings from 8 p.m. until say 10:30, whenever they end. And I track. I've been make it a personal thing for me to just track what's been happening in terms of views and trying to pick up on people's attitude or people's interests. And one of the things that stuck out to me, that jumped out to me for the last 5-6 days, up until last night, is the numbers on Facebook in terms of views, and the numbers on Facebook in terms of views, and Facebook and YouTube in terms of views, is quite telling. I harken back to August 5th election. Some of the same things happened in the federal election there on St. Kitts and Nevis, when you saw at one point even the accusation of people buying views and all that sort of parties buying views and all that. But one of the things that borne out in that election in terms of the result was that during the last 10 days leading into the final polling there, which would have been August 5th, Labour began to stretch its viewership on the social network platforms. And that demonstrated itself. Those views, they also demonstrated, ahead of PAM and PLP, their numbers were tremendous. And it showed with the 14,000 votes that they garnered, which was a record number in terms of any party getting votes, here in St. Kitts Nevis. So it tells you voter intent, it tells you voter interest, where voter intent and voter interest is. And it kind of speaks to you. It doesn't necessarily mean that all those folks would vote for one party or the next. But I do believe there's been a tightening in terms of the social platforms, network platforms. There's been a tightening in terms of views. Formally, in that election in August 5th, which was federal election, one of the things you saw, which was always distinctive on the social media platforms, CCM, the party in power, has always led on those platforms. Led by at least maybe a 40, 50, at least a minimum of 50 vote, a 50 viewer margin, and particularly on Facebook. This time around, it is, for the most part, for the last maybe 7 days, there's been a tightening, and not only a tightening, but for the most part, the opposition has been leading, from what I saw. And I mean, and the numbers, some of them are record-breaking numbers from both parties, because the interest has been going up. I think Sunday night, the NRP had 263 on Facebook, 263 views on Facebook, which seemed to be a record so far for this cycle. They were up to 220 at one point on Facebook. One second before I let you go.
No, walk with me. See what I'm saying, Mr. Glendale. We don't have a lot of time. Yeah. Right? So let's see whether we can, put the point that you're making, so I can go to Naya and move on to something else. So the point you're making in terms of the numbers and your metadata and stuff like that, the metadata suggests that whoever is leading on Facebook and the social media wins.
No, I'm not suggesting that necessarily.
So I
said there will be the question that was posed. Would it be the same results as we saw before? And I outlined what happened historically and what is happening now. And I said there is a tightening in what's happening. No one can tell the outcome. At this point, nobody knows what's going to happen with the overseas. Nobody knows how it's going to happen. But it would not be the same in terms of voter turnout and in terms of the collection of votes, percentage-wise. Party-wise and candidates-wise. That would not be the same.
So that what happened on August 5th is not a good predictor of what will happen on December 12th.
Different election.
Okay.
Totally
Naya.
Interesting, Webbo. I think the fundamental word in what we're talking about is trend, because that's what you asked about. In terms of people's participation, as Glendale have pointed out, we expect higher participation in the local election. So as it relates to trend and participation, we can say that we expect more participation in the local election. But as it relates to encroachment on people's turf, to put it that way, meaning what we saw on August 5th is on the local front, we see NRP making a mark that they probably have not been making for a long time. The question is whether or not we would continue to see that trend in that particular respect. I think we would be seeing an improved NRP in this local election. Maybe biting off just a bits and pieces of the CCM holes here on Nevis, and that to me is expected as NRP now market the new candidates, new faces. And at the same time, as time prolongs, because as a government stays in office, the more people would have to say or will be able to say. And the question is whether or not the CCM have stayed in office to that extent where the NRP would have so much to say that can tip tip things over. That is where we are in a sense. But in terms of trend here, I expect to see some encroachment on the CCM turf a little bit. I expect to see, in terms of people's participation, more people participating. Probably in terms of even people coming home here.
So you expect to see a bigger outcome, as Glendale said, in a bigger participation, more people voting, a bigger percentage voting.
Yes.
You expect to see a different result?
Further encroachment.
Because
when I say different result, I am not saying one will win the other, but as I say, I think that the NRP would encroach a little more than they were. Or that trend that we realized in 2000 in August 5th. And I think we realized the NRP have gained some strength. I think they would continue.
The NRP gained some strength, but the loss Charlestown, but the loss Charlestown, by Glendale had pointed out, by the worst margin ever.
Correct.
But you concluded that they made some strides there.
Yes. I mean, you can look at.
You have some numbers where you work with me.
Yes.
You have a Charlestown, St. Paul's.
Yes.
Which you lost in an election by a higher margin than the last time, and based on that numbers or data, you concluded that you did better?
No, Webbo, it's not based on the numbers really. Well, you're probably right, because we're talking about trend.
No, I'm just asking a question.
No, you're probably right, because we're talking about trend.
Right.
You know, but in a general sense, I think the NRP became a little more popular in August 5th election than it was previously, and I think that slight popularity would continue into this election. That I regard as a trend that was noticeable from my point of view.
So
it may not comes out in the votes, but in terms of popularity and degree of acceptance, I see them had that what can I say? They were more considered in August 5th than they were previously, and I think they will be even more considered in the local election, or listened to.
Okay, so if you don't use the numbers for the example that I gave as the basis, how would you then explain the fact that in St. James, the margin that CCM won by was not as large as the margin in the election before? If you said that didn't really matter, right? But the NRP, the St. James candidate, right, did not win as higher margin. But you said in that instance you're not using the numbers.
I'm not using the numbers.
So what will you? Okay, all right.
I'm not using the numbers.
I got you. So we're not using numbers.
Well,
okay.
You probably are, but I'm not.
Okay, well, that's what I meant. You're not using numbers.
Okay.
So the second question or the area that I wanted to go, are all the parties essentially offering the same ideas and perhaps the same projects? And if so, is it therefore a sense of the difference between personalities and characters in terms of the voters, or who actually eventually is elected? Who wants to go first?
Well, based on what I'm getting from the ground, the numbers will be greater this time around on the CCM side than it was on the NRP side. using some data from the federal and even from the past, I don't really agree with what Naya is saying, simply because you brought in a salient point: character, personality, two salient points. There is a certain amount of baggage which each party has, and when you attempt to quantify or analyze the baggage, then you have to put numbers to them, and ultimately numbers are what speak at the end of the election. I'm not here to give any party much advice, because they're all supposed to know their game. They're supposed to know what makes people tick and what turns out people. But baggage can be quantified in terms of votes, or the lack thereof. And as a result, which party has more baggage on the negative side as compared to the positive side? Again, it equals votes. I leave it there, Webbo.
Glendale, same question.
Yeah, same question. One of the things is when you're in office for a while, it becomes a point of diminishing returns. When the laws of diminishing returns do kick in at some point. Now, another thing happens here: personalities. The issue of personalities. Yes, that's going to be reckoned. That's going to be taken into focus. But one of the things that's also going to be also looked at is what's being offered on the platform, meaning what's going to happen for the next 5 years, which party is telling you what they will do from what they will not do. And I think that is where this is going to break. I think we're in a situation right now, here on this island and globally, of course, where inflation is pretty much running rampant. Salaries are not moving in terms of, regardless of what, salaries are not moving in any direction, up or down. And with inflation means higher prices, and anxiety will set in. So it's what's being offered for the next 5 years people are listening to. I think personalities, I think, goes through the window. Is not a big factor when it comes to a consequential issue as to life and death. I would put it life and death. That sounds a little bit drastic, but in terms of living and being able to carve out a life for you and your future, your kids. So I think it comes down to that, and it comes down to money, as Stanley would always say. But those two factors, what are you offering for the next 5 years in terms of what you want to implement in the country?
Naya, the same question.
Webbo, can you ask me the question again?
Yes. All the parties essentially offering the same ideas and or perhaps projects? And if that is so, right? If that's not so, then you probably can outline the differences. But if that was so, is it in essence comes down to personalities and the character or the candidates basically in this election coming up?
Well, I hope it's not like that, really. I hope it's not about personality. I listen to a few meetings. I hear some ideas being thrown out there. So I would not say they exactly have the same ideas in a sense. To a great extent, I think the opposition leader advanced a lot of ideas based on the Green Revolution, which I don't hear much coming from the other side in that respect. The rebuilding of coral reefs and so forth. Those are of great interest. But Webbo, light only shine in darkness. Regardless of what is being said and what is being passed on in terms of money and everything else, if there isn't really darkness, then a light won't shine, and it comes down to that basically. If the ruling party is well littered, then of course they will remain in power. If the perception is there are darkness, then the NRP basically would shine. They have slightly different ideas, which I think maybe the CCM are not advancing those. Otherwise, the question would have been simply, well, how come you're not doing it, even though you're talking about it? But I think giving an opposition who can always say a lot of things, whether it's realistically, whether it can really work out, but they can advance a lot more than the party in power. But it's about the perception, whether or not the NRP is saying things that powerful, that real, that makes what the CCM is on about looks like nothing. And I relate that to light and darkness. And I say, well, lights only shine where darkness exists. And so, if the CCM is seen as a party doing well and well littered, then the NRP won't triumph, and vice versa.
One of the things I ask the questions against the backdrop is that the polls are a few days away. So to say a lot of hypotheticals when the polls are 5 or 6 days away is different to the hypotheticals if the poll were a year or two away. So I just wanted to make that point. Nonetheless, a person's perception or view of something is always welcome and interesting. So the question number 3, and by the way, callers, after this question, you're free to call in at 1-869-469-1616-1700 if you'd like to put something on the table, make a question, add a comment or anything. So following up on what we were just discussing from the question before, name 1 or 2 things that might have at this point, heading toward the polls in a couple of days. Name 1 or 2 things, 3 or 4 if you will, that may have stood out in your mind that's vastly different amongst the parties. And I didn't say the 2 parties because keep in mind again, there are 3 parties contesting. So name 1 or 2 things that stand out in your mind that are vastly different amongst the parties. Who wants to go first?
Well, let me just take a shot at it, Webbo. Currently, we have eyes to see. And we are seeing the CCM, the incumbent, they're in office as a result. They have done quite a lot of things that are very practical, they're seen, and they cannot be twisted in any way. They're there simply because they have been implemented. Pragmatically, I think they have performed admirably. Reference: infrastructure development, educational development in terms of scholarships that are available and have been taken, areas of implementation regarding equipment for health, NEVLEC, in the area of public works or Mr. Brand's area. The water tanks been installed and the whole 9 yards. They are there, and if you're too blind to see them, you can accept the potential promises that have been put forward by the NRP and the MRM. But if you were to traverse the length and breadth of Nevis and you don't see the improvements, it means that you have to come up with a lie. In my view, the CCM has performed over a period of time, and as a result, the evidence is there. In the economy, things are not that bad as Glendale would have mentioned. Inflation and all that is associated with inflation. The war in Ukraine has impacted adversely on supplies or the supply chain, in shipping, fuel, and the general cost of doing business. But at the same time, we are managing, and the ship has been steadied, and it's an even keel going forward and upward. As a result, Nevis and St. Kitts are in a much better place than they were during the COVID and even before the COVID, because the federal minister, prior federal minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Mark Brantley, produced admirably.
Okay, Mr. Stanley, I'll let you continue, but let me just take this. I actually said one or two things, but good evening, thank you for holding.
Good evening, Mr. Herbert.
Yes.
Good evening to your panelists.
Good evening.
Yeah, gentlemen, I have just a few things to say. One, it is my understanding that when an election is called, it's a time for the electorate to choose persons to serve for the next 5 years. That is in St. Kitts Nevis. But also, at that same time, to me, it must be a time for the electorate also to call into account the stewardships of those who were last elected for the last 5 years. The electorate need to call into account their stewardship as well, not just say we are only going to elect. Yes, that is part of it, but to me, you must also call into account the stewardship of those who are presently in office. As such, I say, at this time, it's a time for review and reflection on the part of the electorate. Now, there's a few things that I feel the electorate should consider. For example, did those who were elected last time live up to the promises that they made at that time? What about manifesto? Do they have a manifesto this time where they're outlining to you what are their plans, long-term, mid-term, and short-term, to move the island forward and upward in a progressive way? Not just only word of mouth, because it's good to have things on paper so that when you're reviewing, you can look back over them. What is their record in and out of public office? Can the electorates really say that they have been good corporate citizens? Do they have the requisite skills for the position to which they aspire at this time? Have they demonstrated the ability to listen to different point of view and treat those who has a different point of view with respect? Yes, you can be forceful or so on, but treat them with respect as well. Do they believe, I'm talking about the electorates, do you, the electorates, believe that they served well the last time? And when I say serve well, I'm not only talking about some people, but all of the people. And I go back again to this point where I'm saying again that on the political campaign, I feel all the politicians should be forceful with their point, but they should respect their opponents and those who oppose them as well. Yes, you can make your point, but when you're talking about each other, you don't need to use certain language. Because remember, we, the electorates, are listening to. And it's not only you, the politicians, who have education and have common sense. Well, I'll end by saying this. I believe at this time, we need to put principle over emotions and not just say, I support this or that party, whichever one. Why is that is true that you have your favorite party, yes, and you do support it. Remember, I did not say, you must not say you support this party. I'm saying that must not be all of it. Yes, you support your party. But remember, politicians are supposed to continue to earn your respect after they are elected each time. Don't tell me about, oh well, you did good 25 years ago and you're coming to me now on that record. Yes, I will consider it to a certain point. But if that is all that I'm going to go on, whether somebody did something wrong 25 years ago or somebody did something right 25 years ago, well then if that is all we are going on, then why fresh elections then? You're evaluating these people each 5 years. That's what you're doing. You're evaluating them each 5 years. And they must earn your respect each time that they elected to office. And when they go in there, they should do what they say they will do. Mind you, we know they won't be able to do everything. But you must be pleased with their performance. And I say, if you don't think that was the case, then obviously it's time for change. Good night, gentlemen.
Good evening. Mr. Stanley, finish up and then I'll go on to Glendale with the same question.
What has been done, the infrastructure, the road in Bartville is now being paved, being constructed, reconstructed. There's another portion of road going from Cliff Dwellers to Nisbet Plantation. The number of houses.
Okay, Mr. Stanley, I'm going to give you a chance to continue making that list, but I really wanted the particular question addressed. So, Glendale, the question is, name one or two things which stand out in your mind that's vastly different amongst the parties, the CCM, the MRM, and the NRP, that can make can be a determining factor or factors in the outcome of the election?
I think the singular thing that the NRP I find has lynched its campaign on this time around is the idea of jobs, opportunity, and the weight. With the weight of inflation, I would use the term the weight of inflation that's hanging over right now. It's no fault of the current government that inflation is here. That's a global condition. But when global conditions are great and the upswing is great, if you're in power and you're in office, you get the benefits. It's a matter right now that has to be dealt with. That's the cry, the lack of affordability in terms of being able to go to the shops, and the prices become scary. Disposable income become less, and as this continues, this sort of thing continues in terms of where we are, and there's not enough lack of opportunities, particularly for young people. And to get into in terms of jobs and what have you, who coming out of school, 200 every year, and all that sort of thing. I think it's impactful at this juncture. It's the timing of this election is going to pretty much be a personal thing. It's a pocketbook election in my mind. It has nothing else to do with anything else. I think the current government that's in place has done a good job as it relates to the infrastructure of this country. They have done a good job, but that is not in question at this point. Everybody is looking towards the future and where we are right now, and you have to offer the people some way out and a roadmap to the future. And I think that might be a little bit lacking on the incumbents. We've all conceded that for the most part here on this panel, based on what I heard. They have not advanced that argument, and that is the difference, in my opinion.
Now, the question again. Name one or two things that stand out in your mind that's vastly different amongst the parties contesting the election that can be a determining factor in the outcome of the election.
Well, Webbo, I think the NRP constant emphasis on the suffering of the people as it relates to single mothers, and I think it comes down to what Glenn was speaking about, inflation and prices. Basically, a difficult situation. The fact that we have 4 women running as opposed to on the other side have 4 men. Whatever is difference by nature in the female, and it's been said they're more emotional, more caring, and so forth. I think that might or can be seen as a difference. The fact that there are more females over here, and whatever is positive about that, and it looks to me as they constantly emphasize on single parents and people unable to meet ends and so forth. They are basically promulgating a concept of care, and it looks like to me that is a marked difference. And I'm not saying that the CCM have that quality with them, but they are more campaigning on what they've been achieved, what we can see in a physical sense, infrastructure and so forth. But I think the NRP to me hinges on more the emotions that and by nature what the woman feels, and therefore they kind of exhibit a tendency which seems more caring at this point.
The numbers are 1-869-469-1616 and 1700 if you would like to be a part of the discussion. I'll take a quick break and then we will be right. This is Talk That Get Results. Edric W. Stanley, Glendale Herbert, Conrad Naya Liebert. Your phone calls when we come back on 1-869-469-1616 and or 1700. We'll be back after these.
Builders Paradise is offering a large variety of floor and wall tiles at very competitive prices. Builders Paradise has over 2 million pieces in stock, lots of different styles to choose from. Whether you're renovating or tiling a new house, Builders Paradise has what you need. Wow! Oh, and remember, we're open all day Saturday to serve you better. This is something that you can't refuse. Visit Builders Paradise today at the C.A. Paul Southwell Industrial Site in St. Kitts or call them at 466-4938.
From the Caribbean's powerhouse.
Merry Christmas from all of us to you. Merry Christmas.
Back on this episode of Talk That Get Results with Conrad Nye Libert, Edric W. Stanley, Glendale Herbert. Your phone calls on 1-869-469-1616 and 01700. By the way, if you're just joining us, we're looking at what might happen, the expectations on all sides for the election, the Nevis Island Assembly elections due on Monday, the 12th of December. The parties contesting the elections, the Concerned Citizens Movement contesting all 5 seats, with Mark Brantley, in the leader of the Concerned Citizens Movement, contesting in St. John's, number 2. Spencer Brand contesting in St. Paul's, number 1. He's the incumbent also. Eric Evelyn contesting in number 3. That's St. George, Gingerland. He is the incumbent there as well. And in number 4, St. James, Alexis Jeffers. He's also the incumbent there in St. James. And then number 5 in St. Thomas Parish, Latoya Jones will be the contender against the NRP holds that seat. And then the Nevis Reformation Party offering Dr. Janice Daniel Hodge, who is the leader, contesting in number 4, St. James. J.D. Keynes contesting in number 1, St. Paul's. Number 2, St. John's, Dr. Patricia Bartlett contesting there. Number 3, St. George, Rohan Isles contesting there. And number 5, Cleone Stapleton Simmons is the incumbent in St. Thomas for the NRP. And then the Morals Restoration Movement, Samuel Keynes is the leader, contesting in number 2, St. John's. And Patricia Jeffers contesting in number 4, St. James. Now, let's look a little at the MRM. In the last time we were at the polls, which was the federal election, that's a few months ago, they debuted, they garnered some votes, didn't make a lot of a difference, but history has shown, and some people say we should not pay much attention to history. I always do. History has shown that some seats can be very close. And Edric Stanley will tell you, he claims, Edric, that he was the deciding factor in 1992 when he ran with the St. John's People's Party and got how many votes, Edric?
39.
39 votes. And thus he says that he made a difference in that seat and thus the whole election. So 30 votes, 39 votes, 15, 20, and so can well make a difference. So the question is, might the MRM be a determining factor in, well, they're contesting number 4, St. James, and number 2, St. John's. If you were to, from the trend in August, And if you were to argue, they may not make a significant difference in terms of numbers. Might they nevertheless, in the numbers, if the trend remains, might the numbers they make this time around make a significant difference? Glendale, you're nodding, so you go first.
Yeah, yes, Webber. I think that could be they can be very impactful in this election. Like I said at the onset when we started this show, that I think the numbers are going to be extremely close in this one. I feel we've seen elections in this country where people win by 7 votes, 11 votes, 14 votes. That's those sort of narrow margins. And any party in 1992, when Stanley ran, he was impactful in Sim Daniel losing that seat in that area by that 39 votes. Sim Daniel, I think, lost by, I don't remember the actual number, but it was a very slim margin. That those votes, I think maybe 20-something, the 39 votes, that was taken by Edric and his party made a difference. So my point is, yes, I do agree that MRM can be quite impactful in this election, because I do believe in St. James and in St. John's, where Mr. Keynes is running, those are going to be, they can be impactful in those 2 areas, particularly if the voter turnout is high. Anything north of 65%, I consider that high in Nevis at this juncture, because we had 48% there in the federal in August. Anything north of that, watch out, because like they always say in politics, the rule of thumb goes that the lower the turnout, it favors the incumbent. The higher the turnout, it favors the opposition.
Right, but what the evidence has shown, though, it has not always been true in the Nevis Island Assembly elections, because if you come from the same 1992 that you are referring to, what the evidence shows is that one party has won maybe 80% and 90% of those elections, right, when the turnout was high. So I understand the theory that you just brought, but when you have the practical or the evidence that shows differently, I think you should put that on the table as well. So I just wanted to point that out.
Well, I actually went into the race. I had only 1 month in the race. MRM been campaigning on Facebook and the other areas for almost a year, and now it's a second election, so we'll see what impact can bring to the table with reference to the outcome of the election. I had a conversation with a family member. I'm shaking my head telling you the family member is saying negative to MRM. Stay out of it. I leave it there, Webbo.
I'll encourage them to stay in it. Webbo, I think the local election tends to be more localized, because now we have 5 seats coming out of 3 seats. So the same James, where would be contested, in that particular region, and I think where Pat Jeffers are from, I think they could be, of course, more impactful than their previous trial in the federal election, and same thing here in St. John's. I think slight more ripples, I suppose, they can cause, but they can affect the election to a great extent. But
so you're suggesting, Naya, that the persons who voted one way in the federal election might vote differently 5 months later in the local election, and what might be the reason?
Well, I'm not sure a lot of people feel like the outcome of the last election wasn't something that was nice to them. They probably lose some hope and trust in the winners of the last election. But I think because it's more localized in St. James and in St. John's, meaning that it's not stretched all the way around to St. Thomas's, and she's from that particular region, I think she might just cause a little more ripple in that particular region, and the same things for the candidate for the MR in St. John's.
Yes, Edric.
Well, what I would continue to say, if you look at the work done in Communication and Works by the Honorable Spencer Brand, got a long list. The water, the road, those are two outstanding factors. In agriculture, housing and land, the Honorable Zook Jeffers, has built several houses for the people of Nevis in different areas. At the top of Craddock Road, up in Hamilton, over in Maddens, Zion, maybe in Jessop's. Houses are needed, and based on what has been done so far, he has done a remarkable job in housing and land. Now, in terms of jobs, anybody, I think, who wants a job can find a job. If you're not mentally, physically, or emotionally handicapped. They have just finished, or maybe still on the construction and gearing toward completion, the AVEC Center at Gingerland Secondary School, which puts in motion an area to train our people, those without the skills, to learn a trade and to begin to enter into the workforce. During COVID, nobody went without getting paid in Nevis. Everybody got paid. Therefore, there is empathy and sympathy coming from the head of the Nevis Island administration over that terrible period. Therefore, it must be said that the leadership skills and quality coming from the head, which is the Premier, Mark Brantley, is remarkable.
Okay, let me just take this. Good evening, thank you for holding.
Good evening, Webber. Good evening to the panel. I just want to say one little thing. Now, the MRM ain't going to make no difference for the local election. If you watch this, if you listen to the status from the federal election, right? The lady over at St. James's, right? She do not get no vote in St. Thomas's, you know. So if she from over there, what difference they gonna make now? And then the gentleman there, if you watch the status from the federal election, they can't make no difference. They cannot make no difference. The best thing for them to do is to stay out, but they're trying something I wish them all the best. But it never make no difference now. Good night.
So you don't, well, you
Caller.
call Hello, caller.
Hello.
No, I was wondering, you don't think they can take away votes from either party?
No.
So we expect them to get their vote from their
They
new
only get
party?
like 3 votes with the federal election.
Yeah,
and it
but
never make no
they can
difference.
improve.
Trust
They
me.
can improve. They can improve.
They improve
Yes,
in the
they
local
can.
election. Let me tell you something, Naya. I'm 60 years old. I'm in Nevis so long, right? Nevis people don't go over and change to nothing. You gotta be a family and those things. So just like how it is, it's just. And then the question that Webber posed to you guys for the first question,
Yes.
Webber posed. Up to now, none of you guys answer Webber question.
What's your
None of you, the 3 of you on the panel, the first question Webber asked you. Asked you all. None of you all answer Webber question up here.
Can you?
Eh?
Can you, sir? I
Yes,
just want
that's
to
what
try.
watch. You all on the panel, right? None of you answer Webber question up here. So don't ask me if I could answer it. Right? I'm listening. You on the panel.
Sir?
You shed some
Okay.
light to us. You can help us.
Sir?
I'm going to call back. I'm going to help you.
Sir?
Go ahead, I'm listening.
Okay. All right. Who?
Yeah, I was just merely trying to tell him, MRM? Yeah. Samuel Keynes, I think, received 77 votes in the federal contest in August 5th. Now 77 is a far cry from what Stanley got, 39. He's almost doubling it.
Yeah, but
So,
you need.
it's a different election.
You need work with me. We need to, by way of information, let the public know that Mr. Keynes got 77 with St. John's and St. Paul's combined.
Correct.
And Mr. Stanley got 39, was it?
That is
Yes.
correct.
And that was from St. John's only.
only one
They-
month?
they just- work with me. You
One
see,
month
all-
was in the election. Why do I
okay, go ahead.
And, Stanley, of course, Stanley claimed, and many claim, now along with Stanley, that he was impactful in that election because it was the exit of Sim Daniels from politics. By losing by 24, I think he lost by. So it can be impactful, the MRM candidates. So I'm not going to throw that out and say, well, I've said at the onset also that we've lost election by, I've seen election being lost by 7 votes, 11 votes, 14 votes, on and on. So it will be, there can be, create an effect.
But by sheer numbers alone, the truth is that one vote can make a difference.
Absolutely.
Because you can have two candidates running by a particular even, and then a third person gets 1 vote and it makes a difference. So, theoretically it can. I think what some people are arguing from a factual standpoint, the way they see it, that those two races that they might be referring to will not be that close, so that 1 or 10 or 12 votes can make a difference, right? I think that is the point that really is being made. But in theory,
It must.
1 vote can make a difference.
Well, my participation in that election was to defend my castle at Churchbound, simply because the objective was to dig me out, root me out before I gather root. So I dust off my skills, went in the race, and the rest was history. 1 month in the race.
Well, I do hope that the electorate kind of think just a little more of Nevis. In a conversation with myself today, I really contemplate that in a very serious way. What really makes people go out there and vote their heart, vote for Nevis. In doing so here, in this island, you might, have some difficulties. Because again, it's our political culture,
No, let me just take this. I'll come back to you. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Hello?
Good evening. You're on the air. Caller, could you listen to your caller? Could you listen to your phone and not?
Mm-hmm. Good evening to you and good evening to your panel. I just want to deal with two issues quickly. But before I move on, I just want to ask the question: if there is anyone in this world who do have the right to do what is wrong, I really want to ask this question. If anyone, any man, any party, any leader, or any government have the right to do what is wrong? And I just want your panel to answer that question quickly before I move on.
No.
It's just a yes or no.
No.
No. No.
Okay. Before I get on to this particular question, why I ask this question, I also want to deal with another issue. In reference to the two candidates who are running independently, is there reason, are there any reasons you guys can maybe pinpoint why they choose to run in the number 4 and number 2? Are they from these areas, or because they have too many dishonest, to be honest, people in politics? They could be coming in to run or decide to run mainly because they either want to help the government or they want to help the opposition. It has nothing to do with service. We have seen it down here where we had, anyhow, I will deal with that another time. But I want to know why these guys choose number 4 and number 2. If you guys can expound on these two particular areas why they choose to run in number 4 and number 2. But I just want to say before I leave, because as I said, I have seen so much dishonesty, not only here in the Federation, but throughout the world, politicians. We have too many dishonest politicians, people who get themselves involved, who are not interested in what really it should be the reason why you get interested in politics. Because if you're seeking to get into politics, it should be only for one reason. And that one and only reason is to serve. And if you are fortunately elected, you are only should be elected to do only one thing, and that only one thing is to do what is good. So when you do good, you're not doing any favor to anybody, right? But when we're going to have politicians who come and believe that they have a right to do what is wrong, how come the people in the opposition, under the circumstances, they felt that they had the right to do wrong in breaking their constitution? If you set in your constitution that you're not supposed to run in 2 different elections, but because of circumstances, because the election was called, and you think that you do not have other candidates, you're going to break the constitution and run. So you ain't into government yet to make laws, but you believe that you have the right to break laws? But suppose you get into the government, because if you ain't in yet, and you think that you have the right to do what is wrong, if you get into government, you ain't going to think the same thing? I mean, people really got to get this thing seriously. I am not supporting anybody under no circumstances. There is no God. No man, no party is perfect, because there are some people who feel that way. But people have to understand that when it comes to governance, it's something that you have to take seriously. Because I have a lot of things to deal with in terms of the federal government and the federal system and the federal election and the local election, which I will deal with another time.
Okay.
But I just wanted to deal with this particular issue because it's
caller,
that I take very serious.
I got you. By way of by way of information, this is not answering the question, but by way of information in terms of the question that you asked, why the number 2, why running number 4, number 2 for those candidates? What I know is that the person who's running the number 4 is actually from that area, number 4, and the person who's running in number 2, I think he doesn't live in the area at the point, but he's from that area. So I that might be a factor. I don't know, but that's just a fact.
I understand what you're saying, Webbo.
Okay.
But it could be more than that.
Yeah, but work with me. I'm not offering that as the reason. But I'm just saying that's just happened to be a fact.
Yeah.
Just like when Mr. Stanley ran in number 2, he was from the St. John's area. And I just thought I would give you some information which you probably was not abreast of, okay?
Right. And that is what, as you say, when in reference to this long and outstanding program, is only the best will do. And I am very, very happy and proud of the powerhouse of the Eastern Caribbean and the excellent job that you have done over the years, and I just have to continue to commend you and to encourage you, and that anyone who comes and the station and to speak to the nation, that the standard should be very, very high in terms of motivation, inspiration, and education.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thanks much. Yes. Okay. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for holding.
Yeah, Mr. Herbert, good night again.
Yes.
You asked a question earlier that what the panelists saw, what difference between both parties the panelists saw, that might have a big factor in determining the election.
Yes.
Well, I know, and I'm sure most of us know, that there is something that is called good, better, and best. Now, we also know that two different people can look at a problem and one come with excuses while the other one genuinely try to come up with some solutions. It may not be the perfect solution, but you can see they genuinely try to come with something to solve the problem rather than just complain. I have to say, honestly, in listening to both sides, it just seemed to me, I don't know how it seemed to other people, but to me, but Mr. Herbert, assure you should know by now that I try to listen keen when elections is around. It just seemed to me that the party in power is just giving excuses. Oh, the COVID, the war, the Mind you, I understand that if you are the one who's sitting in the kitchen, really, you are the one who feeling the heat. It seemed to me, though, that the opposition, and it might be a little easier for them to think this way too because they're in opposition, I understand that. But it just seemed like the opposition are the one who's trying to come up with programs that would help the situation rather than just complain over it. Mind you, I qualify it by saying the opposition is in a better position to speak that way. However, though, both parties are speaking to the electorate, right? And remember, the electorates are listening to your messaging. The electorate, it's like you're trying to win the confidence of the electorates. So, I just find that whichever party it is that is seeking to come up with solutions, I would prefer to go that way, but not everybody. Another thing that I find again, in politics, you must be serious. The caller a while ago was just talking about seriousness. If you know you're not serious, why you put up yourself to run? So that you have somebody who sits in government at this time and is bloating out on the platform. People are nervous. If I am not going out there and vote to CCM, tap, home, that don't sound to me like you're really serious in the electoral process. Good night.
Okay, thank you. The other question I would like to ask, is you would like to put, is the overseas vote. And that has always been a discussion for the past few cycles. And it reaches as far as the courthouse and all that, and there's always a debate about the overseas vote and who should come and who shouldn't come to vote, etc., etc., etc. What I find is interesting, though, in the waning days of the campaign, that rhetoric is not so obvious. What seemed to be more obvious is the fight to see who can get the bigger share of the overseas vote. What does the panel make of it? Beginning with Edric, you go first.
The thing is quite obvious. Who has the better mousetrap and the better system of execution? And the firepower.
So that the overseas vote, whether or not they should or should not come or be allowed to participate, and the waning days of the campaign is a non-issue?
It is a issue front and center. And
but so then if it continues to be an issue front and center, my observation is that you don't hear that rhetoric now. Why?
Simply because they may have propelled it so often and it has not rung through based on the
Okay, let me put the question another way and then come back. Why is it we have that does not seem to be an issue at this point in time?
Simply because they don't want to be accused or having to carry that yoke around your neck, simply because I don't want to say, well, let me put it this way. The guy already cast, you know. And I'm saying to you, those who are not blind would see when they come and they will vote accordingly.
Now, same question. Why apparently it doesn't seem as if that there is an issue now, and we'll get to the earlier question, but why isn't there seem to be an issue now about the overseas voter, whether they should or shouldn't?
There isn't an issue now because you said it, Webbo. Both are involved in it. That's the law. You have to yield to it. And you obviously got to be part of it if you want to make a serious attempt in winning this election.
Okay, so based on your answer, then, before now, was it not the law? When the argument was...
Yes, but
right.
it's almost like a tactic, you know. If I talk about it, maybe I might prevent you from doing it while I in the dark doing it, you know. It's all that type of stuff.
It's a tactic.
It's a tactic.
Glendale.
Yeah, it's politics, you know, Webbo. And basically, you're not going to go against it during the election season, because you may have to go for the same low-hanging fruit, which is overseas, to compete. But in the gut of a lot of them who is on the outside, who don't have the access, of course, they don't want it. They would rather not compete because then, you know.
Okay, so how will it affect you then? So if I say that Naya ought not to be able to vote at some point in time, and then I say, well, okay, Naya, vote. The question therefore is, will it affect me?
Yes, it will. It's problematic.
You know, I don't think so, no, Naya, because let me just say why it doesn't affect you. Because the overseas vote, if you don't mind. Yeah, because the overseas vote is locked in pretty much. They're generally locked into the party. It's almost like a legacy vote. They left. You would have left Nevis, and if you're a CCM or if you're NRP or whatever the case, it's become legacy for you. And you're not really, you know, you don't have that tactile feel with the issues on the ground as much. At least for me, you know, I mean, one who has been out there and know a lot of people who does this. So I mean, it's a low hanging fruit, like I said, that the parties can go to. It's, you know, easy. But it costs. There's a heavy cost to it financially.
Naya, go ahead.
I completely forget what I was going to say. Sorry.
Okay. So if therefore it makes no difference, then my follow-up question will be, so then why the argument? If you're saying it makes no difference, right? If I say that, you know, Naya should not be able to vote, right? Because you're arguing that with Naya that it doesn't make any difference, it wouldn't have any effect. Good evening, thank you for holding.
Mr. Herbert, I got a lot today, but you know the question you just asked, right?
Yeah, but before you finish though, make it quick because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Yes.
You guys should take into consideration it's who has the treasury at that time. And that is the biggest factor. Who has the treasury at that time is in favor with it. Good night.
Okay, thank you. Right, so, okay.
I simply think, Webbo, you could say 2 years ago, and the election is this year, it's impacting negatively, really. People don't forget, really, you know. If you're advocating, they shouldn't have overseas voters, people mark down that, really. I don't really agree with Glenn that everything is so set and fixed in terms of people, you know, the foreign voters and political party. You have people coming from America and playing, and they come and vote for anybody, you know. And political party use that as a trick too. They encourage people to get on board and get on board and get on board when you look to vote for somebody else. All these things take place, you know. But if you're going to argue 2 years ago that the overseas voters, they should not, you know, the constitutional or electoral law should change because it's going to impact on you negatively, however slight, I think so.
The overseas vote, right, has always been, for the last couple of cycles, has always been almost an antagonistic thing, right? Who's is there a particular party that in general, because of the rhetoric, that the overseas voter might be more attracted to?
Well, I suppose the overseas voters will be more attracted to the party that seems to accommodate them in their importance, as to their importance and their relevance to the political process and the island from which they are from.
Which is, so the question then is who well, let me put the question this way. Is there a particular party that perhaps fits the description that you give, Naya? You just give in terms of, when I ask, is there a particular party which in general the overseas voter will be more attracted to? And you say, well, he'll be more attracted to that is more accommodating. Is there one that is more accommodated, seemingly?
Well, I would think if you don't promulgate an issue about overseas voters in a negative way, meaning, well, we should not, they just come and choose a government and go back. If you speak in that terms towards them, you would not be seen as very accommodative. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. Well, it's up to the people out there to decide that. But it's a very sensitive area as far as I check.
I always ask this question. I've been asking it for a number of cycles in the last program before the vote. By the way, God's willing, we'll be here on Monday evening to do the count.
Yes.
But before all that, we'll be bringing you all the updates and the blow-by-blow action. So make sure you're with us election evening. Now, I always do this, and a person can respond however they choose, because it's a question that is asked of you and your view. Naya, beginning with Naya. Short answer. At the end, Glendale seems as if he knows the question. So by the time I reach you, you will have your answer. At the end of the night, on Monday the 12th of December, what will the call be?
Webbo, if you can allow me to zip my lip on that, I'll be happy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Glendale.
We will all sit here and we'll have a drink together at the end.
And Edric W. Stanley.
CCM is going to go back at the helm of government, simply because of their record.
I got you. This is thought that get results, and that's the last word. This program repeats tomorrow at 10 o'clock, following the VON News Minute. Join the Honorable Mark Brantley tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock for On Demand. Thank you all again for joining us. This is your voice in the community, thought that get results. You all have a wonderful evening.